Today, we're taking a hard look at the events of September 10th, 2025. This was the day a political rally turned into a public assassination. We're going to break down the detailed timeline of the attack on conservative activist Charlie Kirk, explore the political climate that surrounded it, and tackle the very difficult questions it left in its wake. So, the scene is Utah Valley University in Orem, Utah. A big speaking event, part of a national tour, was all set for midday. But what was supposed to be a political debate would, in a matter of hours, become the epicenter of a national tragedy. And then, in a flash, in a moment captured on dozens of cell phones and streamed live, the event was violently, shockingly cut short. This is the description from those videos that just spread like wildfire online, showing the exact instant the attack happened and throwing an entire campus into total chaos. Okay, so to really get what happened here, you have to understand the context. This wasn't just any old speech. This was the big kickoff for Charlie Kirk's fall tour, the American Comeback Tour. And believe me, it was already steeped in controversy before it even began. So let's paint a picture of the scene. It's all happening at an outdoor amphitheater with a huge crowd, about 3,000 people. Now, for security, you've got a handful of local police officers and Kirk's own private team. But the tension was already palpable. See, an online petition to get the event canceled had nearly 1,000 signatures. Despite that, the university held its ground, saying it was all about upholding their free speech policies. All right, now let's get into the timeline. We're going to do a precise minute-by-minute breakdown of how this assassination actually went down based on everything we know from security footage and the official reports that came out of the investigation. So the big question is, right, how did a gunman manage to get into position, completely unnoticed, in the middle of a busy university campus during such a high-profile event? Well, the timeline reveals a series of actions that were just chillingly deliberate. This timeline, it really shows you the chilling precision of the attack. At 11:52 a.m., that's less than 10 minutes before the event is even supposed to start, the gunman is caught on camera moving to a rooftop that overlooks the whole amphitheater. Kirk takes the stage right at noon. Then, just 23 minutes into his speech, at 12:23, he's hit. And get this, it took another 14 minutes for the university to issue a campus-wide lockdown as all hell was breaking loose on the ground. And that number, 3,000, you gotta let that sink in. That's a huge crowd, and it just highlights how vulnerable the situation was. People who were there later told reporters the security felt, well, surprisingly relaxed. There were no metal detectors, no bag checks, for thousands of people packed into an open-air venue. That detail became a massive point of scrutiny after the attack. To really grasp why this event triggered such an intense, visceral reaction across the country, we have to understand who Charlie Kirk was. He wasn't just another commentator. He was a hugely influential and, to put it mildly, a deeply polarizing figure in American politics. At just 31 years old, Charlie Kirk had already built a political force with his conservative youth movement, Turning Point USA. He was a media personality, an author, and a really staunch ally of Donald Trump, which made him one of the most recognizable faces of the entire MAGA movement. And his rhetoric, well, it earned him a massive, loyal following, but also some incredibly intense criticism. So why was he so polarizing? Well, let's just look at some of his own words. This comment, for example, attacking one of the landmark laws in modern American history. His supporters saw it as a brave challenge to what they'd call liberal orthodoxy. His critics? They saw it as a flat-out rejection of racial equality. And here's another one that really stirred things up, especially around his commentary on race and DEI programs. This statement was widely condemned for invoking what many saw as racist tropes about the competence of Black professionals. Now, Kirk himself frames it as a critique of affirmative action, but it sparked a major backlash. And you see this pattern, right? His positions were often presented in these very black and white absolute terms. When he was asked about an exception for abortion, even in the extreme case of a child who was a victim of rape, his answer was completely unequivocal. This kind of ideological rigidity really defined his stances and cemented his role as a culture warrior who absolutely refused to compromise. As you can imagine, the assassination sent this massive shockwave across the country. But what's so telling is how that initial unified condemnation of political violence just shattered and quickly gave way to the very same polarization that Kirk himself had thrived on. In those first few hours, the response was one of shared horror. President Trump ordered flags to be flown at half-staff. And then, In a really rare moment of unity, you had all the living former presidents, from Bill Clinton to Joe Biden, issuing statements condemning the act and pleading for a stop to political violence. But that unity, it didn't last long at all. The tragedy almost immediately became political ammunition. On one side, many Republicans and conservative commentators started blaming what they called liberal rhetoric for inciting the attack. Some on the far right even called for revenge. On the other side, many Democrats used it to push for gun control and argued that, hey, divisive rhetoric from all sides had helped create this violent climate. So after the dust settled, we were left with all these really tough, lingering questions. Questions about security for public figures, about the future of free speech on college campuses, and about this escalating cycle of political violence in America. And security experts, they jumped on this immediately, pointing to a whole series of, frankly, critical failures. The outdoor venue itself was just inherently difficult to secure. The complete lack of basic vetting, like metal detectors, left a massive crowd totally exposed. And then, tragically, the shooter used that high ground position from a nearby building, a tactic with some eerie, chilling parallels to the assassination attempt on Donald Trump back in 2024. And beyond the physical security, there's a huge concern about the impact on free speech. As Nico Perino put it, it's going to rattle college campuses. The fear is that this will have a serious chilling effect, with universities becoming way more reluctant to host controversial speakers, especially outdoors, because they just can't guarantee their safety. Yeah, and it's so important to remember this didn't happen in a vacuum. Kirk's killing happened against the backdrop of a documented, steady, and frankly alarming increase in threats against public officials and political figures. The data shows these threats have just been climbing and climbing since 2017, almost perfectly mirroring the country's deepening political divides. So what are we left with? Well, this one tragic event really forces us to confront a fundamental question for our time. In an era of escalating political violence, what is the future of open debate itself? It's a question that goes way beyond this one attack, touching the very foundation of how we communicate, how we disagree, and ultimately, how we coexist in a democracy.